So I told him, I said, "You want to be off the show? Okay, you're off the show. Don't come back next week." I remember being quite little, and my grandmother and I lived in a one-room apartment block north of Hollywood Boulevard. And so that was our street. And so we would go down there and look at try to look at all the movie stars going into a premiere, hanging over the ropes and all of that. And I'll never forget when Linda Darnell, who was a beautiful actress in the 40s and 50s, and she was my favorite, she and Betty Grable. And Linda was attending a premiere at the Pantages Theater and got out of her limo because the traffic was backed up, and she started walking towards, and my grandmother, who was fearless, grabbed her sleeve and said, "Linda, Linda, this little girl just loves you. Give her your autograph." You know, and she was so kind to me and sweet, in spite of the fact that my grandmother just about stranglehold her, you know. She asked me my name, and I was about eight years old, asked me my name and where did I go to school, and it stayed with me. So all these years that here she was, kind to this little kid that, you know, I'm hanging over the ropes and everybody was screaming for her, and she paid attention to me. And maybe that's part of why I like to pay attention to younger people myself. I mean, I don't think that's the only reason, but I just never forgot her kindness. I think I was born at the right time, and I don't know that that could happen today, what happened to me and my age group. I was raised going to the movies. My grandmother and I would hit Hollywood Boulevard and maybe sometimes see as many as 8 movies a week because there'd be double features stuff, and we'd get in 4 of them on the weekend. And all of them, I was very naive. Nicky and Judy, Nelson and Jeanette, Betty Grable, Fred and Ginger, all of these, and then even the comedies. And the bad guys got it, the good guys won. There was no gray area, you know. And so I had this naive quality when I went to New York, thinking, well, I'm not going to get disappointed if I don't get the job right away, because neither did Mickey and Judy, you know. So it was okay, I'll go and do something else, you know. And so, and I remember once I was at an audition, and it was narrowed down to another girl and me, and she got the part. And I just said to myself, it was her time. It wasn't my time. It was her time to get that job. My time will come, and it'll be wonderful for me. I knew it inside, and then I got Once Upon a Mattress, which did it for me. Well, I just, I persevered. I knew there was something out there that I could do, and I was never afraid. But I think it was because of the movies, because they weren't cynical. I had no cynicism. I absorbed those movies, and then I'd come home and play out the movies with my best girlfriend. I'd be Betty Grable, she'd be June Haver, and we'd act out the movies. And we used to climb the Hollywood sign. You can't do it now, but and it was all kind of splintered, and you know and we'd climb up and just lean over. The O's were my favorite. I would climb up on the O's and go, "Hollywood, I'll beat you yet." You know, it was this. We had more fun. But that's what I always loved. That's why I loved doing the movie takeoffs that we did. That, you know, all of those movie takeoffs I had seen as a kid. You know, Mildred Pierce and Gone with the Wind, brilliant Bob Mackie with the costume. Oh, just tons of them. And some we did that nobody remembered, but they were funny enough to parody. And so they got it anyway. There was one that Joan Fontaine did called Born to be Bad, and we called it Raised to be Rotten. And she was just this horrible, but it was a funny, funny takeoff. We did Love Story. Oh gosh. If I was starting out now, see, I went to New York to be on the stage, to do musical comedy, and I didn't care if I was in the chorus. You know, I had nothing in my mind about fame. All I wanted was to be able to perform and pay my rent and buy clothes and food. That was my goal. And I had done a lot of theatrical stuff at UCLA, musical stuff. And I loved Ethel Merman and Mary Martin. I thought, well, that's for me. The other thing just kind of happened. I got into Once Upon a Mattress, and that was a funny role. It was a heavy singing role, but it was also funny. And then I did a couple of Gary Moore shows, and they asked me to be a regular on that. So I fell into the comedic thing. I never really thought I would ever do comedy, like we did at all. And then I thought, well, I like to hear the laughs where we want them, you know. And so the bug bit then. And then I realized that after I'd done Once Upon a Mattress for 1 year, 8 shows a week, the same thing, the same thing, the same thing. Nope, I liked the variety of it. You know, okay, we did this one, now let's go at the one next week. Well, I had done a song written by Ken Welch called I Made a Fool of Myself Over John Foster Dulles, which was about the then Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, who was aptly named. He was really dull. And so it became a funny song because it was a takeoff on all the girls at that time who were crazy about Elvis. And here I am crazy about this person who he wore a derby all the time in a coat, and he never smiled or anything like that. So for me to sing a song, I made a fool of myself over this man, it became very, well, it was funny. And then I was asked to do it on the Jack Parr show. And I did it on a Tuesday night and went back to perform at the Blue Angel nightclub and did the song. And the phones were ringing off the hook, people calling and so forth. And then Jack Parr asked me to come back that Thursday and do the song again because Mr. Dulles' assistant had called, and Mr. Dulles hadn't seen it, but would I do it again so he could see it? You know, so I went back on Thursday night, then Ed Sullivan called. I did it again on that Sunday. So that whole week, I'd done the song 3 times. Now, people were coming into the Blue Angel nightclub, not to see the headliner, but to see me. I was opening, you know, and it was packed, and I thought, oh boy. And I started to feel very sure of myself. Like, I got the answer. I have the answer to everything, and I've got it. I can do this all the time now, and I'm not scared. It's great. So I went out this one night, packed audience, and I started John Foster Dulles' number. And there wasn't one laugh. There wasn't one laugh. They were looking at me. I thought like they didn't speak English or they were an oil painting. I had no idea. And I thought, what? I mean, I was bombing. And I barely got this. By the time I finished my 20-minute act, to go upstairs to my dressing room to wait to do the midnight show. Now, I had really bombed. Now, I'm walking down the hall towards my dressing room, which was at the end of the hall, and there was a men's room right here in the ladies' room. And I see this man coming towards me, and he's weaving. He's drunk. And I was crying, and I had my head down. I was hoping he wouldn't recognize me, but I've got the costume on and everything. And he stopped, and I'm right at the men's room door, and he's right there. And he says, hey. "Weren't you the little lady who was just on down there? Huh? Were you just on downstairs?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Boy, you stink." And he went into the men's room. So the midnight show went a little better. What I had lost was, I don't know, some kind of humanness or vulnerability or what, but to come out there and go, "I made a fool of myself," was wrong. But I was just feeling too, like I owned it, instead of playing the part, being, and so I've bombed since then. I've never gotten that cockiness back, and I'm grateful for it. He would crack me up. I mean, I just thought they were brilliant. I didn't get on the show. I didn't meet Sid till years later. But there was a friend of mine who worked with Sid. His name was Milt Kamen. He was a comedian, and he kind of stood by for Sid when they would be blocking. He would do all, and then Sid would be in the booth to see what they were doing and what he would have to do. Anyway, I did watch a run-through. Milt sneaked me into the balcony of the theater where they were rehearsing. And they went live on Saturday nights. They were live. I think it was 90 minutes. It was something. And so I went, because I watched him every week. And so I'm watching this one where they were doing a takeoff on Inherit the Wind. And Sid was Clarence Darrow with the suspenders and the whole thing. And Carl was the other attorney. And Howie Morris, but it was kind of, he was up for murder, Howie. And so the jury comes back and says, "We find the defendant guilty as charged." And Sid's character, the whole sketch was built on this, and his character got up and he said, "You think he's guilty, but he's not guilty, and I'm going to prove it again, and I'm going to tell you." He had this whole wonderful, funny monologue that was brilliant. So I watched that. So I went home where I was living at the rehearsal club in New York, and I turned it on, and it was 8 o'clock, and there they were, and they were doing that sketch. The jury, the foreman of the jury comes in. He's an extra actor and he said, "We find the defendant," and he was nervous, "We find the defendant not guilty." And he was supposed to say, "We find the defendant guilty." Now this is live. And the whole sketch is built on that. So Sid got up and said, "You say he's not guilty, but everybody in this courtroom thinks he's guilty, and I have to wipe that from their minds." And then he went into his speech. Now, the best part of this story, which shows you the kind of guy Sid Caesar is, the poor extra who had screwed it up was running out of the theater and just leaving. He was scared to death, and just was outside of the stage door. Commercial went on, and it was going to be the end of the show, and Sid would always say, "Good night, we'll see you next week," or whatever. But during the commercial, Sid ran out, grabbed the guy, and said, "You come back next week." And then he went back and closed the show. I mean, that's pretty wonderful.
Never heard that story. That's
yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm not sure if I'm telling it right about the sketch or anything, but it was totally screwed up because this poor guy got nervous. When I did all the physical stuff, I had never been physical. I was a pretty good athlete. I could run fast and stuff like that, but I wasn't that physical as a kid, roller skating and so forth, but like anybody else, And I remember I was doing Garry's show, and we were doing a sketch that Neil Simon had written. At that time, he was called Doc Simon. And he had written a sketch called Playhouse 90 Seconds. And it was a little sketch that literally ran 90 seconds. And it was based on Jack and Jill. And so Durward Kirby was in a hospital bed with bandages all over him. And Garry Moore was the doctor. And I was with Durward. And he was Jack and I was Jill. And so the doctor came in and said, and Durward was going, "Oh," like that. And he said, "Jill, what happened to Jack?" I said, "Well, we went up the hill. And we were going up the hill. He said, well, why were you going up the hill? To fetch pail water. And then what? And then what? Jack fell down and broke his crown. He said, oh, I'm so sorry, Jill. And then I say, and I'm just going to go tumbling after. And then I was to jump out of a window, out of the hospital window. Well, it never occurred to me, because I'd never done a stunt before, to check to see what was out, what I was going to land on. I don't know what I thought. And so we were rehearsing it, because in the rehearsal hall, we just said, okay, she jumps out the window. Now we're on the set, and there's the window there. And I dove out the window, and I landed on a mattress. And oh, and I remember Bob Banner saying, have you ever done stunts like this before? Oh, yeah, because I'm sure I could do that. I landed on a mattress that the crew had put down, and I said, oh, thanks for the mattress. Everybody cracked up because they knew I had never done a stunt before. Why would I say that? I guess I thought I was just going to go splat. I have no idea. That's how naive I was. I can appreciate the timing, the comedic timing that these actresses have. I remember years ago when I was doing the Garry Moore show, and Ed Wynn, who was a vaudevillian comedian, was a guest. And he was kind of old then, you know, because he'd started in the early teens, 1900s. And he was a guest, and we were sitting around the table reading our script and stuff. And he defined comedy actors and comics. He said, comics are like Bob Hope. Bob Hope says funny things. Comedians, actors, are people who can say things funny. That's like Jack Benny. I mean, he would just go, well, and you'd be screaming, well, on the page, that's not a joke, but it was a way he delivered everything in his timing. And that's what I think all these young women have today, that is just, it's delightful to watch. I never felt that I was paving the way for anything, really. I remember CBS didn't want me to do the show, but I had it in my contract that they had to do it. It was an unbelievable contract. And they had to put us on for 30 weeks, hour shows. And they tried to talk me out of it to do a sitcom, but variety was what I loved and what I knew from doing the Garry Moore show all those years. And, you know, they said, well, it's Gleason, it's Sid Caesar, it's I said that, Jackie Gleason, Dean Martin, Milton Berle, you know, Carol, you know, it's not a woman's game. And I said, I'm not even thinking of it as, I'm just thinking I'm a variety performer. This is what I do best. This is what I love. I love music. I love sketches. I love having guest stars. And I wanted a rep company like Sid Caesar had. And so I never really thought I was going to be paving any way for anybody at all, you know. But I'm glad somebody might think that. But I never started out to do that. When the mail started to come in, you know, the fan mail and everything, and then there would be these young girls, kids, you know, writing me and saying, I want to be like I want to do what you do when I grow up, you know, and things like that. So, you know, that's that. It was a well-oiled machine because most of the people, even some in front of the camera, like the dancers, and the director in the booth, and some of the crew, moved out from the Garry Moore show, from New York, to do our show. And so we knew, we had it down to, we had a school schedule. On Mondays, 10 o'clock reading in Carol's room. 11 o'clock music rehearsal. 12 o'clock to 1, lunch. Okay, 1 o'clock, dance rehearsal. Learn the steps. 2 o'clock, run over a couple of the sketches. That was Monday. I'd be home. I'd go in at 10, and I'd be home by 4. And it would be the same thing every day. Wednesday was costume fittings for me, and I'd go in at 1. And we do a run through for the crew and everybody that we'd rehearse those 2 days. And Thursday was blocking, and Friday was the only long day, which was still shorter than most because we did a complete run through Friday morning, a dress rehearsal in front of an audience, 5 o'clock Friday. Changed that audience, grabbed a sandwich, and did the air show around 8, and went home. I learned so much from Garry Moore. I wanted to emulate him when we got our show. By that, I remember when we would be sitting around reading a sketch or something, and Garry would have a funny line, and he would say, you know, I shouldn't have this line. Give that line to Durward Kirby, or give that line to Carol. They can read it funnier than I can. And he always did. He would do funny stuff too, but he always wanted to spread it out. And I think he was asked at one time how come he was the most unselfish person who ever had a variety show. I mean, and he said, oh no, I am selfish, because in giving everybody else the right to do, you know, to have their go at it, it only makes our show more watchable, better. I'm not hogging everything. And that's what I felt about our show. And I always call it our show, because that's what it was. There were times when I'd be the straight man to Tim or Harvey, and vice versa, and back and forth, you know, and turn it over to Vicki. Let her have shine. But that only made our show much better. Tim Conway, for instance, wrote the characters of Mr. Tudball and Mrs. Wiggins. And so we knew those characters so well by the time we had done the fourth one or whatever, that all we would do would be to say, okay, Carol, you go over here and sit on this line, and Tim, you go over there, and you're over here, and that, just for blocking, for moving. But we never did it because, well, for one reason, Tim would never do it to the ink. You know, he was always doing something else, you know, throwing a line out, trying to get me to laugh. And I couldn't laugh as Mrs. Wiggins because the IQ fairy never visited her. And when you're that dumb, you have no sense of humor. You can't get so when Tim would make these jokes and these crap, you see me as Mrs. Wiggins sometimes doing this a lot. Looking at the nail, I was biting my finger to keep from laughing. And it looked like she was, you know, biting her nail. But he'd throw stuff at us. But it was wonderful, too. And he would do it to the ink, as we say, the way it was written, for the dress rehearsal, which we would tape at 5 o'clock. And then for the air show, he would check with the director and say, did you get all the shots? Yep. And then he would say, okay, when I walk over the window in the hotel room sketch, don't be on a waist shot, be on a head to toe. And that's all he would say, because he would think up some kind of business to do. So the crew was winging it. The director was winging it. And the audience knew. And it was gold, what he did. He's just brilliant. We never broke up on purpose. Never. Harvey would get so mad at himself because he's the consummate actor and performer. It got so that when there was a Harvey and Tim sketch, the opening shot, if Tim just did this to Harvey, Harvey would be gone. We used to have bets in the green room, not as to whether or not Harvey would break up, but how long could he last? We'd put $1 in the pot, you know. And well, I think he's going to last for about 3 minutes. No, I think it'll be 10 seconds, you know. But it was great fun. We laughed for 11 years. I remember when we first did Nora, we called her. It was we thought we would only do it one time, you know. And Steve Lawrence played the William Holden role. You know, and of course I was doing Gloria Swanson, and Harvey was doing the butler. And so we did it a couple of more times, and Gloria Swanson called us, and she said, I want to come on your show. And she came on our show, and we did a whole silent movie together at the end, and it was just a thrill. I'm getting off the subject here, but I think what I loved about doing a variety show was that I could, well, let me put it, one week I had Betty Grable as my guest. And I grew up worshiping Betty Grable, and she was on our show. And we had the best time together. Then Gloria Swanson was on. I did a takeoff on Gilda that Rita Hayworth did, that classic. Rita Hayworth sent me a telegram saying she wanted to be on the show. She came on the show. So that was such a thrill. And, to have that, and then to have my wonderful buddies, the group that we worked with, with Tim and Harvey, God rest him, his soul, and Vicky and Lyle. It was just a meeting of the minds, what we did. And Harvey actually, he was the better tennis player to my tennis play. When you go out to play tennis, you want a better player to hit the ball back to you, and because it makes your game better. That's what Harvey did for me.
In what way?
Well, he was better than I was. He was a consummate actor. He could do any accent. He was grounded in what he was doing. My mind at times would be all over the place, like how's the audience reacting here, or am I going to, or that. Not always, but a lot of times. But Harvey was always grounded, and he helped me be grounded. Oh my, oh God. Harvey at times could be a little difficult. He never bothered me, even if he was difficult to meet with me or anything. Because he would turn on a dime and be just adorable the next second, But this one week, he was a true curmudgeon. He was angry at something or whatever, and we were there that morning to pre-tape a musical number. And Petula Clark and Tim Conway were on as the guests. And I said, Tim, you've got Harvey, calm down. I'm upset and I don't even want to be on this show. And he was rude at one point. He was kind of, he made some remark to Petula, which was uncalled for. Well, that got the fur up here. I got, okay, you can step on me because I can take it, but you don't step on our guest. You don't behave that way. So I said, you've got to stop that. He said, I don't even want to be here. I said, okay, meet me tonight after the taping in your dressing room. Don't go home yet. Okay, so I decided I would just be Joan Crawford or somebody like that and go in and be the boss, because I was never that way. But so I told him, I said, you want to be off the show? Okay, you're off the show. Don't come back next week. Now, nobody knew I was doing this. Joe, my husband, who was producing, and so they didn't know that I was doing this. And Harvey got he said, well, you can't do it. I have a contract. I said, I can break that contract because I'll just say that you were really rude to the guests and you're difficult to work with and stuff. And other people can be witness to this. Then he said, well, let me come back next week. He was backtracking. And I said, okay. I said, but when you come back next week, we all have our problems, but when you come back next week, I don't want you to bring your problems here. When I see you in the hall, I want you to whistle and be happy. And all. So we went home. I told everybody about, and he went across the street after the taping to the farmer's daughter, or there was a bar across the street from CBS, and everybody went there for drinks after the show, all the crew and everything. And Harvey got up on the counter, and said, my queen fired me tonight. I love her. It's like, if I behaved badly towards him, he loved it. I don't know, maybe he was a masochist or something. But anyway, the next week, come Monday, and we're going to read this show in my dressing room. And I went to the ladies' room, and I came back out into the hall, and Harvey, the elevator door was opening, and he looked at me, and he went, and skipped down the hall. So that Friday, we put a sign on his dressing room door saying, Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky. And he loved that. He loved the fact that we had that moment. And he always talked about it. Well, it was hard for me to do, but as I said, I couldn't do it if it was me that he was acting that way to, because he did all the time. I never bothered. But the fact that he was rude to the guests upset me. If you're doing it right, it's not hard. It's just fun. The thing is, sometimes when you try too hard to be funny, well, like I was doing with the John Foster Dulles number, it falls flat. You're pushing. Just kind of relax and let yourself go and quit commenting, on yourself over here and saying, well, I don't know how she's doing there. Just go with it. And then it's easy. I mean, it's not a walk in the park. There are times, too, when we bombed a lot. We had some pretty awful sketches on our show. One time, we had such a bad sketch on our show. Again, it was like the audience was just staring at us. And at the end of the sketch, we thought it might be a running character. I was playing Mary Worth. Only Mary Worthless, we called her. And I said, and the end of the sketch was, now don't be surprised if I come knocking on your door soon. Mary Worthless, signing off. So I said instead, don't be surprised if I come knocking on your door very soon. Better yet, be surprised because I am never going to do this character again. And it went on the air. I felt cleansed. But that's the fun of our show. We could do that, we just let it go. And I got such fan mail from that saying, thank you, we thought it was awful too. But that was so great that you said that. Well, I was scared to death at first when we were going to do the show. Bob Banner, our executive producer, came up. He said, Carol, we don't want to have a warm-up person. They usually have somebody who comes out and tells jokes before you start to tape. And he said, I think you should come out and do questions and answers. Well, Garry used to do it before the Garry Moore show, but they never taped it. He would just go out and warm up the audience, and he was brilliant. And I used to listen to him do that, and I thought, wow. And I said, I can't do that. First of all, I'd be scared that nobody would ask anything, and second of all, I'd be scared they would. So, but he talked me into it, and I'll never forget that first taping. I was just all over the place, gawky, scared, everything. Then once the show started to air and people started to see that that's what we were going to do, then the audience was in on it, and so a lot of people then started raising their hands, and I started having fun with it. I see a parallel with Lucy and me because, and I just loved her so much. We were really close, and she came to see me in my off-Broadway show, Once Upon a Mattress, the second night, and I didn't know her, and I spotted her through the curtain with the red hair and all, and I was more nervous that night than I was the night before when we opened in front of the critics. She came backstage, and she said, called me Kid. She said, Kid, you were really good, and this and that, and she talked to me for about a half hour in my dressing room, and she said, listen, if you ever need me for anything, give me a call. I thought, wow. So it was about 3 or 4 years later, I was doing a special for CBS. And they said, you got to get a big star to be your guest. And so the producer talked me into calling Lucy. He said, she said that to you all those years. I said, well, I don't want to bother her. And so finally I did. I called her, and she got on the phone right away. She was in her office. She said, hey, Kid, how you doing? My God, I see you all the time, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I'm calling. I know you're busy. I know you're busy, Lucy, and please, I was just fumfering all over. I said, well, she said, well, what are you up to? I said, well, I'm going to do this special for CBS, and I just wonder if it was just, and she said, when do you want me? So that was, and she was a guest. It was called Carol Plus 2, and that was with Lucy and Zero Mustel. But she came through. Now, I did her show, and she would do my show. We would trade off. This was not I Love Lucy. This was when she had the Lucy show, and she was Lucy Carmichael and so forth. And we went to the farmer's market one night for dinner before orchestra rehearsal on my show. And she said, "Kid, you know, it's good that you have Joe to be, you know, the guy that speaks up and everything." She said, "I used to come in. Desi would have done everything with the scripts and the this and the that, and all I had to do was be Lucy, you know." And when they got divorced and she was going to do the Lucy show, she went in and expecting Monday morning the script to be perfect, and it wasn't. And she got kind of frantic and not knowing how to change it or this or that because she was never confrontational. So she called for lunch break, and she went into her office and thought about it, and she went out. Now, see, women didn't do that much in those days. I mean, Gleason would go in and say, "This stinks. This script stinks. Fix it." And nobody would think anything about it because, wow, he really knows what he's a guy. A woman, there's another name for that, you know, at that time. So Lucy did go back after lunch and told them in no uncertain terms how they had to fix that script, and it better be done by tomorrow morning or you're out. I mean, she was strong. And she took a sip of her drink and she said, "And kid, that's when they put the S on the end of my name." That's one of my favorite stories about her. She passed away on my birthday. She rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. I didn't mind it when I did Lucy's show because I just was anxious to see what she would do or come up with new stuff and all. We were more off the cuff, you know, and more improvisational. Lucy was not necessarily a musical performer, but she could sing, and she could do certain steps and things because she did that when she was a star in the movies, you know. But so I don't see the comparison. In fact, we talked about it, and she said, I can't do what you do. And I said, I can't do what you do. So, you know. It's my favorite medium to have a real audience there that you're playing for and to, and then to have the chance to come back the following week and do it all over again with new material, with new guests, with new music, it was like doing a wonderful Broadway musical review a week, which is what we did. And when you think of it, we were an hour show. I would come out and do maybe 15 minutes of questions and answers, which we could cut down depending on the length that we were running that week. Many times I had as many as 9 costume changes. We had singers and dancers with all their costume changes and so forth. And I would do like 3 or 4 sketches, a musical number with our guests, the finale, the Q&As and so forth. We did it as if we were live. So people would still be taping in the hall when we left, and we could go to dinner. And I would say most of the time we did an hour and 15 minutes with all of that, with a live 28-piece orchestra and all. Maybe 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes, and we'd be out of there. It was great. And the show didn't suffer because, you know, the only time we would stop would be if something happened and the scenery fell down. Then we'd stop. But otherwise, we kept barreling on. That's the reason I never wanted to slow down or, you know, have the audience sit there and wait while they change the scenery. We would, had we had flies, like a real theater in our studio, which I loved anyway at CBS, we would probably have tried to do it pretty much live because we couldn't fly the scenery up, so they had to roll it out into the hall. and then bring the other stuff back in for the next sketch or the next number, you know. And I used to have bets with the crew that I could do a skin-out change, including wigs and blacking out my teeth and putting on a fat suit or whatever, faster than they could wheel the scenery in. And we would have contests. And because I didn't want that audience to get bored, because if they got bored, we wouldn't be on our toes that well. We might push too much. We wouldn't be having as much fun. I have done some shows in the past, after we did our show, that were sitcoms. Now that's 22 minutes of show. 5 hours. Some of them, yeah, they stop, they start, the audience comes in and then they leave, and maybe half the show has been done, and then a new audience comes in and they don't know what's going on. And it just wore me out. I thought I would never do television today like they do it. I couldn't. I'm a war horse. I'm a theater person. I don't think we were the only ones at that time to inspire or whatever people, because I think of what that whole Saturday night lineup was inspiring to me with oh God, Mary, but All in the Family, MASH, Mary, Bob Newhart, and Us. That was a great pot. In fact, I get mail or people talk to me about it when I'm on the road, about how that night, and other nights too, were appointment television, where the whole family would sit and watch. And I still get mail to this day from people who now were kids, so they're now in their 40s, saying, I grew up and it was a time that we would laugh together. And I would sit and watch it with my grandmother, and it just this brings back such good memories and so forth. And that's the nicest compliment I think any of us can get.